with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, October 24th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Distinguished Professor of History of Black Studies at the University of Missouri, Devin Fergus, on his book, The Land of the Fee, Hidden Costs and the Decline of the American Middle Class. Also on the program today, one day after a bomb was found in George Soros' mailbox, bombs found in mail to both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and a pipe bomb just found at CNN. Meanwhile, the lies about the caravan almost drowned out by the lies that there's a new middle-class tax cut. Meanwhile, Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp fears the exercise of people's right to vote. And it turns out he has a slight problem with a loan he made to himself from his bank that he owned and didn't pay back.
It's a good deal.
It's a good deal.
Nice.
Good original concept there.
And
Nice
good,
living
well
if you can score it. Meanwhile, early voting in Texas setting records, but will it matter? And the Trump administration politicizing administrative judges on the board of veteran appeals. And white supremacist Richard Spencer turns out to be just as abusive to his own family as to anybody else. And the White House issues a comedically inept anti-socialism screed. And grift update, walk away, walks away from walk away. And the Creation Museum possibly headed to extinction. All this and more on today's Majority Report, ladies and gentlemen. We will get to that Creationism Museum story, because longtime listeners will know that this has been one of my bailiwicks for a decade. In fact, you know what? Maybe we should even hold off on it until we dig up. I did a couple of phone calls to the Creation Museum. I think the Answers in Genesis people, I think before it was even built. And back in the day when I used to make, I wouldn't call them prank phone calls, because I would very quickly at the beginning of the call say that this was being recorded for air. And I would introduce myself as a reporter from the Majority Report. Sometimes it was the family reporter. Sometimes it was the chastity reporter. That gets you... Back in the day, if you said you were from the Majority Report and you were the chastity reporter, there was basically nothing you couldn't get a fundamentalist Christian to tell you. Even if they thought it was going on air. I had one guy tell me that he thought a little bit of bullying of a kid who might be a little bit gay in school was okay. But maybe we'll dig those.
I bet that really upset you, Samantha.
We'll dig those up. But and then when I launched this show, this iteration, I think maybe this is even before you were here, Michael, I would read, a listener had sent me, or I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Kyle, got me a book of the Creation Museum. And, once a week I would read a segment of it so that people could find out where stuff really came from instead of all that mumbo jumbo about coming from the water or whatever it was. So the idea that the Creation Museum may be in some way faltering, it's sort of fascinating, because you would think like all that God stuff would be timeless, but apparently it gets a little boring after about 2 or 3 years.
It's a lot of competition too.
Yeah, but we will get to that, and of course we had that report yesterday that the Hobby Lobby family they got ripped off and bought 5 fraudulent Torahs, essentially Dead Sea Scrolls, that turned out to be not so much Dead Sea Scrolls. But they've got money to burn, and you got to appreciate when the grifter gets grifted. That's what the stuff movies are made out of. Folks, and of course we will get to these stories about these various bombs that are found, disturbing. Super disturbing. We will get there in a bit. I should just tell you one of today's sponsors is newsvoice.com/majority. You all know about, in fact, I just wrote a really interesting piece by Matthew Iglesias. Those guys at Vox are writing some good, like, sort of cultural type of pieces these days that I'm enjoying. And this one he talks about the hack gap, which is another one of my bailiwicks, which is the liberal media back in the day when we used to talk of like the center left media was cowering from the right. I'm talking about the aughts, of course, and on the left there was no version of Rush Limbaugh. I mean, we certainly tried to build something akin to that, but there's no Rupert Murdoch ever. There's never been a left-wing version of Rupert Murdoch. I don't know that you could have one, but there isn't even a functional equivalent. Never mind, the same sort of qualities. But there's a new media company that's come up with their own response to some of these problems. It's called News Voice. It's an app for iOS and Android, which you can access for free if you go to newsvoice.com/majority, and it gives you a personalized news feed by aggregating a mix of mainstream media sources, international sources, and independent media sources. This is actually would be a good thing to turn on if you have a friend or a family member who only listens to Fox News or watches Fox News or reads Fox News. This would be a good sort of sneaky way of getting some daylight into their dark, danky media news sources. Because multiple sources are provided for each news story. The entire app is fueled by crowdsourcing. You can upvote stories you think are important so more people will see them. You can add stories to the app, or you can add a source that's missing for a story. It's meant to be a completely open and democratized news aggregator that lets you get every side of every story. They also have a video interview series featuring guests from Chris Hedges to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Go download the app for free at newsvoice.com/majority. Put a link under this video if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening, you can find it in our podcast description. That is newsvoice.com/majority. All right, let's get to this. This was pretty stunning. Obviously, we are now less than 2 weeks away from the election. The president is lying about a caravan that is, 1,000 miles from the border of the U.S., but they're coming here quickly. They're walking at a fairly brisk pace.
For your lake house.
Yeah, exactly.
To challenge the Constitution.
And, of course, they apparently are not only coming to invade the country, but also to pass a middle-class tax cut that Congress hasn't even contemplated yet. That is according to the president. But Still dealing with the implications of the Saudis being bold enough to kill a U.S. resident and fairly well-known columnist in the Washington Post in their embassy because he was critical of them, which gives you a sense of how sometimes these things happen, where leaders from foreign countries feel like, oh, the U.S. has basically said the gloves are off. We have no handcuffs on us anymore. We can do whatever we want. And then they sort of get it wrong. We have a history of stuff like this going awry when that happens. Check out the 91 invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein as a starter, or the Israelis heading up, I think it was into Lebanon again, and basically also exiting Gaza unilaterally and creating another mess there. But here's Donald Trump being asked about his perspective on the Khashoggi murder at this point, where it has become increasingly clear that he was murdered. And here, well, increasingly clear in terms of, I mean, it's quite clear to everyone who doesn't want, who doesn't have a vested interest in pretending otherwise. But even in the context of those who do, it's becoming, clear that they can't maintain this charade anymore. And here's Donald Trump expressing why.
Mr. President, why do you think something like this could have happened? Do you think that there was a failure of leadership on the world stage, that Saudi Arabia wasn't concerned about?
They had a very bad original concept. It was carried out poorly, and the cover-up was one of the worst in the history of cover-ups. It's very simple. Bad deal, should have never been thought of. Somebody really messed up, and they had the worst cover-up ever. And where it should have stopped is at the deal standpoint, where they thought about it, because whoever thought of that idea, I think, is in big trouble. And they should be in big trouble.
Did they tell him don't refer to anything that actually happened? Just call it a deal? I don't understand. What is the what are they talking about?
What he's trying to do there, I think, is first, I think he's genuinely offended by how bad the cover-up was. This is a guy who spent a lot of time around Nicky Scarfo and other really reputable members of organized crime. And the Saudis are literally in the process of doing it's just this weird rogue hit squad that had no connections to any senior leadership and bad ideation. So he's actually, I think he's still trying to give them cover.
Those grooves are worn so deeply in his brain also that everything is a deal to him.
It sounded like
he's on set.
It sounded like he was on set at The Apprentice and basically talking about some attempt to sell hot dogs in Times Square. Hey, I wouldn't have done it that way. It was executed poorly.
The Prince, the first couple of contests, you were so good. You did a great job on Yemen. You had a great photo on Instagram with The Rock. I don't know what happened with you. It was bad at the ideation standpoint.
You're saying a heated ice cream spoon that you have to keep plugged into the wall. I'm just not buying it.
I'm not seeing it. So, Mohammed bin Salman, you're fired.
It really did sound like that. It's almost like we got to address this, but you can't say anything of actually what happened.
This is what it's like to have a business.
This is the one thing I can do.
Don't worry, I got it. First of all, everybody can agree it was a bad deal.
Bad deal.
Finally,
poorly executed.
Poorly executed.
I'm sorry. No pun intended.
Yeah. This is the type of deal you could have easily set up a fake car accident. There's a lot of traffic.
Yeah, blame it on a woman driver. What are you thinking?
Then that could reinforce the whole point of Saudi policy. You guys just weren't thinking. Frankly, it was a mess. Mohammed.
So what? I don't understand. What does he think that they're setting up? They're saying whoever came up with the idea is going to be in big trouble, and that's going to be some guy, one of the guys who came in, the 15 guys.
That's what he's saying.
His rogue idea, and that was a bad deal.
That's what he's saying.
Right. But no one's going to believe that. Who is this for now?
Who it's for potentially is the king has actually been coming back into public. You know, he's very old and he hasn't been on TV much because they give it all to the prince. He's coming back and being like, all right, I'm still in control here. So it's possible that the substantive thing is that this might be it for the prince.
Monarchies rule.
Is that really?
Yeah, I think. I mean, not. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm not saying I put money on it, but there is a tangible.
I don't understand.
If he undercuts, if they say this isn't the Saudi system, this kid is out of control and he's nuts.
Is it possible he's doing it for his base as well?
No,
because they hate the media and journalists.
I just don't think.
I mean, he did do that.
I just don't think that but I don't think that the
base isn't thinking about
the base is like Saudi. I don't think.
Has he implied yet that the journalist deserved it and all the other journalists better watch what they say?
No.
All right, fair.
Although it was interesting.
We'll see.
The Saudi foreign minister went on Fox for his first interview in the U.S., but that's just because Trump will be watching.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program the Arvarh E. Strickland Distinguished Professor of History and Black Studies at the University of Missouri and the author of Land of the Fee, Hidden Costs and the Decline of the American Middle Class, Devin Fergus. Welcome to the program, Devin.
Pleasure to be with you, Sam. I wish it could be on a bit brighter topic and subject, but it was a pleasure to be with you nonetheless.
Well, what was it that led you to look at? Well, maybe we should define fees first, just so that we get a sense of what we're talking about.
Sure, absolutely. I use this expensive definition of fees. So by fees, I'm talking about any cost or expense which is in addition to principal. The private sector, for instance, plays kind of a shell game in order to sort of circumvent regulators often. And so, for instance, when payday loans first hit the market in the early 1990s, one of the ways in which they tried to circumvent, especially state and some level federal regulators, by saying, no, we don't charge interest rates, so this isn't usury. These are actual fees. These are administrative costs, administrative fees. And so again, the use, my use and application of fee is an expanded one. It's anything that's in addition to addition to principal. So, for instance, an origination fee, as I gave the example with the payday lending industry, it could many times really be a fee as a de facto APR or interest rate. Default fees, prepayment penalty fees, as you would find, for instance, in subprime mortgages. And so these fees come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and colors, but it's in effect anything that's beyond the principal loan amount. And we see fees in the public sector, right? Fee as this proxy for taxes, and so we can have that kind of brief conversation if you want to as well.
Well, I remember that back in the day when Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts and he promised no new taxes, and then he just basically instituted a ton of new fees. The big problem, it seems to me, with fees as opposed to taxes is that fees are far more regressive in terms of a form of revenue for the government, and also far less, I guess, transparent.
You hit the nail on the head. I was gonna weigh with the transparency argument, but you already did it precisely. Far less transparent. And often we find with fees that they're often difficult and almost impossible to opt out of. And so the implication of a fee is that a fee is item driven, but we know, let's say with higher education, so the state of California may not raise its tuition, but they sure as heck raise their fees. I'm a university professor. Students at the University of Missouri have to pay tuition, but there are these in-cost fees, and if they don't pay the fee, the user fee, they cannot sit in my classroom. And so the implication is that fees are sort of an itemized sort of thing, an a la carte sort of thing. But in reality, these fees are often critical, integral to the cost of a product, and it's impossible to opt out of. In the same way that often taxes are. So absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
So you've, I feel like you have already half answered this, but just give us a sense of the size of and the importance of these fees in a broader story for particularly the middle class.
Sure. And so what we find is that, again, the cost of these fees cost over $1 trillion per U.S. house. Not per U.S. household, for the U.S. And broken down to let's say an individual median income eats up at least almost half of their income. And so I'm talking about particularly fees, and this is point two to point out, Sam. My work really looks at often fees in critical areas of upward mobility. So I'm not necessarily talking about, let's say, a cable user fee or something like that. And that's important and significant, or a cell phone fee. Again, I wrote a piece a few years ago for New York Times about the rise of phone fees. but I'm primarily talking about fees that are essential areas of upward mobility. The fees associated and then things like housing or higher education, fees that are linked to employment, and we could sort of talk about the ways in which the private sector, the most ubiquitous and common response to the issues of wage stagnation, and then what takes us from home to school and work, fees that are associated or attached to transportation. Particularly, employers want people with, quote, reliable transportation, i.e. a car. And that's what employers mean by reliable transportation. And then there are fees that are associated with, again, the automobile, particularly, or insurance fees. And so what we find is that not just they have fees sort of escalated in all areas, but particularly these four spheres in which have been critical for upward mobility: housing, education, and employment, and what takes us from home to school and work, the automobile. And these fees have created obstacles for barriers for entry into the middle class. And they've also worked to actually erode the middle class in various ways.
Let's talk about, this is timely. I think my audience is aware that I had a debate with a guy who, I don't know, you may be familiar with. He spends a lot of time on college campuses, from Turning Points USA, about sort of about the middle class and some of these things. Particularly, we got into the housing crisis and the subsequent financial crisis in 2008. Let's talk about housing first in terms of these fees and what the implications are, and how, in many respects, I mean, I am familiar with some aspects of how the fees drove this crisis, and that we've talked about on this program, both, I think, in the origination of mortgages, but also even in the wake of the crisis. The allure of fees for a lot of these banks was greater than their desire to refinance or to I should say amend existing mortgages under HAMP. But tell us where fees play the most impact in the story of subprime.
Sure, absolutely. And so what we found with, for instance, the rise of the subprime mortgage market is that all of these the subprime mortgage loans or products which had these creative or toxic instruments, prepayment penalties, which is one of my favorite sort of financial instrument, mortgage toxic. It's sort of counterintuitive. It penalizes someone for paying their bills earlier on time. And so, I mean, that would be sort of one example. The balloon payment fees, as well as just for mortgage sort of charges or fees. All of these aspects and products that are associated or attached to subprime mortgage, all of them increase the likelihood that a borrower would go into default. And so, again, each of those aspects that were associated or attached to the subprime mortgage. And you're precisely right. Initially, subprime mortgages get marketed to people who have less than stellar credit scores, i.e. something less than sort of 660, but it becomes so profitable that by the time we get to the financial crisis, the average prime borrower was being sort of shunted into or channeled into the subprime mortgage market just because of the profitability of these subprime mortgages. And so, again, they become extremely sort of profitable. And here I'm going to sort of say this to you, Sam. I'm actually, I'm also a visiting professor in Northern England at the University, Northumbria University in Newcastle. And then in UK, it's conservatives who are pushing for creative and inventive ways to help consumers have stronger credit scores. Specifically, it's conservatives who are arguing that, let's say, your rent be included as far as your credit score, right? It would be wonderful in the U.S. if you would find conservatives who would make an argument that let's not try to channel people into these subprime mortgage markets like we're having people now do today by saying the underwriting standards in part or at least under the Obama administration, were too tight. We need to loosen those standards. It'd be great if we could have conservatives in the U.S. who would actually make the argument. Let's redefine what's a quality credit history, and not simply look at the history of mortgage borrowing, mortgage lending, but look at people who pay their utility bills on time, pay their rent on time. Those kind of ways could, if you use that, it would actually help borrowers increase their credit score, which would mean that fewer borrowers would actually be shunted into these subprime, or now it's called non-prime markets. There's a thorn by a different name is still a thorn.
Right.
Now it's called non-prime mortgage products. And so it'd be wonderful if conservatives in the U.S. Would take a page out of conservatives, at least in the U.K.
And people should understand that the subprime is just simply a way of justifying far more fees, right? So there is because the idea is that we're not only do we jack up an interest rate because we're theoretically taking more risk, but also what is the justification for the fees in this instance? We're taking more risk, but we want to take more risk so that if you pay this thing off, there's a prepayment penalty, or is it also that there's an awareness of there's just probably a correlation between people who have poor credit scores and people who are not financially savvy?
That correlation is absolutely there as well. People who have lower credit scores aren't financially educated, and so we can. There's so much to discuss here, Sam, because we can argue that it's not necessarily financial education is the key. And in fact, we've gone through a period now, the last 30 years, in which financial contracts and documents have gotten exponentially longer, right? And at the same time that the individual and the time they have to process all this information, that time has gotten increasingly lessened. And what I mean by that is individuals now today commute much farther than their grandparents or parents did 30 or 40 years ago to go to work. You're also working longer hours than people did a generation or two ago. So you're working longer hours, you're commuting farther. You're also in this sort of what I like to call this sort of extracurricular arms sort of race. I'm a parent of a child. My child just came from French class. He has martial arts class. He's in all these extracurricular activities. Why? Because he's competing against other kids of the same sort of class in cadre. And so we experience now is that individuals have less time than ever before to read and process these complex financial documents, which have actually gotten much longer over the last generation. And so how do you square this circle? And the way you square this circle is by bringing in financial regulators and having them delegate responsibility. And now the private sector understands that there's a process of information asymmetry, that you have less time to process this information, and that financial literacy is really a canard or a red herring because of for sundry reasons. Some I sort of laid out. Others we can sort of get into, and so they take advantage of borrowers across, I'd say, the income spectrum, but is most devastating on historically vulnerable populations.
And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau went a long way in requiring more plain English and shorter forms, particularly, I don't know as much for mortgages, although there was certainly reforms in that process. But across the board on some of these contracts, particularly, I think it was, credit card contracts and whatnot.
Absolutely right. And we see what's happened there with the current acting Director Mulvaney, at least, going through a process of catch and kill negative reports by his staff who come out with negative reports about the industry. And so and this is one of the great ironies, right? For a long time, conservatives have made the argument, we don't need regulation. We just need greater, fuller disclosure of financial information and let the consumer decide. And what we experience now in the last few months is actually these sort of same pocket or slice of conservatives providing less information through this via these catch and kill of reports that CFPB had been trying to put out, but again, Mulvaney and others, as well as Betsy DeVos, who's an education department, have been catching and killing and suppressing. And so, yeah.
And let's talk about student debt. You bring up Betsy DeVos. One of the things I know the Trump administration has done in terms of deregulation was we have this massive problem in this country that it was actually quietly, I think one of the things that the Obama administration was doing quite well was beginning to crack down on what is not 100% a scam. Nothing ever is, but the for-profit university industry is largely an extraction machine trying to extract public money via student loans to students, and they tend to be a little bit older students who are going to these universities ostensibly to increase their earning potential in the business world. There's very little data to support this, and there was a regulation that if you were an institution that was putting out was handing out diplomas to people and they would go back into the workforce and there was no return on investment, you had certain limitations as to how much revenue you could derive from student loans. And Betsy DeVos basically said, "Oh, we're lifting that. You can keep pumping out people with essentially with a product that is defective, and we'll still keep giving you money." Talk to us about how the student debt bubble grew and what the implications are, and particularly in the context of fees.
No, you're absolutely right. And the origins of the growth of the student debt bubble really dates back to the Reagan administration. And here I'm going to sort of take just a bigger, broader step back and have a look at almost a sort of meta view. And it was just a fundamental philosophical shift that occurs by Reagan and Reagan. And so the architecture of the financial aid program really sort of gets in place in the 1950s under Dwight Eisenhower. Now, a Republican. Now, Eisenhower wasn't some flaming liberal, but actually in many ways was sort of reticent about even the financial aid program. But he sees the value of financial aid for college students, particularly as a means to address national security issues. And so Eisenhower and others sort of erect the financial aid system. And so since the 1950s, the financial aid program, a system, has been a bipartisan sort of project of both liberals and conservatives. And those who are students of U.S. history know about the consensus era of American history. And this is sort of a reflection of that. So, but in the 1980s, what you find is a fundamental and a dramatic shift by conservatives who begin to see the expansion of financial aid in its existence to students, and begin to see students not as future tax contributors, as Eisenhower and others saw, Eisenhower and obviously Lyndon Johnson, but in the 1980s begin to see students as tax eaters, not as future tax contributors, but as present-day tax eaters. And imagine and looked at and use the rhetoric of using students as similar to those who are on welfare, so the welfare queen, or the unemployed father who's bilking money out of the system, or grandma on Medicaid, and basically sort of lump the college student in with quote unquote the undeserving poor. And with that sort of mindset, what they did was they rolled back low interest student loans, they rolled back grant programs, and invited the private sector more so into the funding and finance of higher education. And that invitation to the private sector gets enlarged in the 1990s under Clinton, but primarily it's actually radical Republicans who do it. And remember the Congressional Republican Revolution of 1994. And they basically pushed back against something called direct lending in the 1990s. And they really muzzle Clinton and those who are pushing for direct lending, and they expand the private sector market and push back against sort of government regulators in education. And what we find with this rollback of direct lending in the 1990s, is that
elaborate if you could on direct lending. Just explain to us what that program is.
Sure, and I'm going to sort of say that direct lending is almost as it sounds. And so rather than a system in which, so direct lending is basically where the government lends money primarily from the Treasury directly to college students, or gives it to the financial office in the college, and then they disperse it to college students. And that system really cuts out the middleman. It cuts out, for instance, the subsidy. Banks which might be subsidizing the loan. It often cuts out the loan servicer, and so it was more of a direct lending from government to the student. And again, that system which cuts out all these middlemen, whether it's the banks on the front end or really student loan services, reduce the cost of the student loan. I mean, if you can imagine, just the administrative costs are cheaper, right? And not simply the administrative costs are cheaper, but also the actual loan product itself is cheaper. Now let's imagine this, Sam. Because the loan itself is cheaper, it means that the student who has to pay back that loan has to pay back less. And what we know, in whether it's a mortgage market or whether it's payday lending or whether it's or higher education, if a particular financial product is cheaper, as logic dictates, it means that the borrower is far more likely to pay it back. And so that means that the borrower is far less likely to go in default, which means that the taxpayer who's actually funding both the direct lending as well as subsidized lending programs is far more likely to get their money back. So a government gets their money back, students get their money, and they get it faster. And so it's a system which actually worked for every population except for the financial services industry. And so because it didn't work for them, they push back and they pressure lawmakers to bring them back into the system. And this is what happens in the 1990s. And they push out direct lending. And they bring back the private sector. And then you see a whole slew of abusive practices and quid pro quos. And once government gets pushed down in terms of direct lending program, private sector comes in, and then they begin to give sweetheart deals to financial aid officers, kickbacks of various sorts. We just had a World Series game last night. Unfortunately, my beloved Dodgers lost. But let's say in the 1990s, you wanted to go see your Yankees play in the World Series. The bank might have a couple of tickets for the financial officer, and they'll give that financial officer some tickets if they would give them access to student lenders. Now, once the bank got access to the student lender, to the student borrower, I should say, they didn't care. The university or the education financial office didn't necessarily care the kind of terms that were given.
Right.
They were just caring about the kickbacks that they would get. And this is a system that existed from the 1990s through the 2000s, and we see several state attorneys general with lawsuits against various student lenders through this system. That was the abusive system, and the great shame is that DeVos and the Trump administration want to go back to this sort of wild, wild west sort of attitude of the 1990s and 2000s, where there's all this abuse taking place. We see the origins and rise and spread of student loan abuses and student loan debt. So, all right. So,
just to make it clear, and also to take the opportunity to state that I'm a Red Sox fan, and so I'm very happy about last night. But
you'll be happy about tonight too, I'm sure.
I'm hoping so. But so we had this type of abuse where there was sort of like extraneous middlemen that were placed into the process of delivering government-backed and government really funded loans. We threw that off. We still obviously have a huge debt problem, but now we're starting to see first the sort of the first order problem we have is fees that are generated and extraneous from private debt collection agencies that are now making their return back, following the Obama administration, where there was a significant push that, to the extent that it could be done just through executive order, to push a lot of these people out from the loan process. We still have a massive problem with loans, obviously, and a problem with the rising costs of education. But this is sort of like an added on attribute. And so what is that? Do I have that history right, that they were pushed out of the industry to a certain extent and they're being brought back in?
No, absolutely right. Push out of industry to a large extent through direct lending, and now they're being brought back in by the DeVos administration. And again, this is, I'll stress this too, it's by ideologues, because if you want to do a simple cost-benefit analysis, these loans are still cheaper and more efficient if done by government. And so if they're really concerned about what's the more efficient sort of product, it would be to keep the middlemen out, and to have a direct lending program. And this is actually, again, but both bipartisan administrations have done studies and research on this. And so, for instance, Lawrence Lindsay, the Republican under George H.W. Bush, talked about how efficient a direct lending program was vis-a-vis guaranteed student loans. And so, but again, this is driven by people with a sort of particular agenda, and also by this sort of cozy relationship with the donor class, the financial donor class, and those two things have created and created this problem. I will say this one sort of coda too, that I view as not simply an add-on to the story of the rising cost of college. It's part of the bigger and broader story, because what happens too is that the federal government begins to roll back its contributions to higher education.
Right.
And so that means there's a shift in that cost from the public sector, from public sector to individuals, from institutions to individuals. And this is what explains the part of the rising cost of college. And so it's part of this bigger and part of this bigger story about the public sector and government's rollback of its contribution and support for higher education.
All right, and lastly, you also have a chapter on wage stagnation and the implications. Again, it's almost, there's always like sort of a push and a pull, right? Like this dynamic where the federal government rolls back funding for publicly subsidized colleges, states cut back on this. Therefore, loans come in to fill that delta, because students now are required. They have more responsibility to pay those fees, and then that gives the opportunity. For the fees to actually go to college tuition, and then the private industry comes in as like barnacles on this transaction as a way of like stripping more cash out of that system. And on some level, that's what we see too with the idea of like payday lending, is that on one hand, you pressure. There are forces that create wage stagnation, and then the other hand, you come in with a sort of a neoliberal solution, as some would characterize it, which is like, we're going to loan you money so that you don't actually need to get paid, but we're also going to make a lot of money off that transaction. It's going to throw you deeper into debt, and so you'll be a repeat customer until one day when you can't.
Oh, no, you've summarized it very well. So there's very, very little I can really add to that. You're absolutely right. That the rise of payday lending is really the private sector's most common, ubiquitous response to the generational crisis of wage stagnation. And I say most common response because there are more payday lenders out there than McDonald's and Starbucks, and studies show McDonald's and Starbucks combined. And so they're common, they're almost everywhere. And payday loans, unlike a credit card, payday loans is expressly designed to address the issue of lack of money from income. And so that's why it's called a payday loan. It's the loan. For that loan, you have to have two things which we consider sort of really pillars for middle class. You must have a paycheck, a working job, and secondly, you must have a bank account. You write a check, drawn from your bank and say that this check is going to be good in 2 weeks from now when I get my paycheck. And so these are the markers of middle class status. And so, but we see that these things, payday lending again has spread more wide and again more commonplace than both Starbucks and McDonald's. And these things we consider markers of middle class life. And I'll say this too, that the Federal Reserve earlier this year came out with a report that 4 out of 10 Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency expense. And so while we think of payday loans as something that other people might take out, realize that nearly half of Americans now are really living from paycheck to paycheck and lack $400 to cover an emergency expense. So many of us are just one job loss or income shock away from a payday loan. And so it's something that really does open itself up to more consumers than those who are actually taking out the loan itself.
Devin Fergus, the book is Land of the Fee, and it is about the hidden costs and the decline of the American middle class. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam, and go Dodgers.
We'll see. All right, we'll see. Right. I wouldn't bet on it, but I appreciate the time. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Dodgers are going to lose tonight, folks. We could be looking at a sweep. This is, one of the this dynamic with these hidden costs that are just another thing, in the course of the debate that I had with Charlie Kirk was just another, and this is, of course, a long, not exclusive to the Trump administration and not simply a function of the Republican Party, but largely they are, largely a malignant force in our politics and a malignant force when it comes to extracting wealth, creating the problem, then extracting wealth from the solution, rather than just starting with the solution, and which is very often just our government. There's no reason why we need to be loaning money to students to go to school. We could just finance the school and give everybody the option to go for free.
That's what Charlie Kirk objects to when he says, "Don't say free stuff, Sam." What he's really mad about is that nobody's going to be able to take a cut on the interest.
It's two things. It's that, but it's also he made it very explicitly clear. Like, you're going to take money from me to pay for somebody else's college? And now we take money from people all the time to pay for other people's expenses. We take money from non-homeowners who pay taxes so that homeowners can have a mortgage deduction, finance the purchase of their homes. Now, but it doesn't necessarily make it available to everybody because you have to have a certain amount of cash to start with. So it basically subsidizes wealthy people's ability to extend the buying power of their money. But you need to first get into a certain club where the dues are, X number of hundreds of, tens of or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of down payment, and then you can get there. We do this with all sorts of things. We subsidize roads. I mean, if you take public transportation, you subsidize roads so that people can have commerce and make all their money. Charlie Kirk in our debate talked about somebody goes out and buys a building. I don't know. He had a very sort of narrow perspective on what capitalists do. They all go out and buy a building and then they start a factory. And but that building has running water. And I can assure you the person who bought that building did not pay for the pipe to go all the way to the reservoir and to go to the sanitation and to go to the treatment center and the electrical grid and the transportation that's involved in there. And then the fire department, right? And the cops. I mean, they're going to protect that building. I mean, so it goes on and on. But Charlie Kirk really, really had a problem with his tax dollars subsidizing, something that he either gets from his folks or from, some right-wing billionaires. In the context of his job, he could get it either way. But he built that. He built that from he already had a lot of scaffolding. Let's put it that way, folks. All right. And speaking of which, in the fun half, we're gonna go over the. We're gonna go after. Oh yeah. Well, we'll take a look. It's hard to know. But in the fun half, we're gonna go over the 20 minutes of the debate that, for whatever reason, were excluded from the TYT video that we played yesterday, and it was sort of the most fun 20 minutes of the debate, in my estimation. We're also more information of the various pipe bombs that have been sent. We are now at let's see, CNN, Eric Holder, Obama, Clinton. Am I missing one? Eric Holder was just the most recent.
Was it Kamala Harris one too? No?
So there's some sketchy details on that one.
Okay, so
Debbie Wasserman Schultz apparently got one. And maybe there's more.
I'm maturing as a person.
There you go.
You said Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and I went right to the Jimmy Dore voice. It was almost like an involuntary physical reaction, and I didn't actually do it.
John Brennan was apparently named on the CNN one. That's unclear. Oh, I see. Let's see. So suspicious packages also sent to Eric Holder, but to the wrong address. As with packages sent to George Soros, Clinton, Obama's, and John Brennan, care of CNN, the return address was Representative Wasserman Schultz. Very poor job of doing a false flag, because she should not have put her address on there.
Well, and also just think of the courage of George Soros to have a bomb planted in his own mailbox.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes
And
commitment.
apparently Wasserman Schultz, I think, also got a maybe something sent to them in a office, in one of her campaign offices. All right, we'll continue to follow this story and others as we go. Fox had one of those really unfortunate moments, and we will regarding this, and we will cover that too in the fun half. Folks, just a reminder, this program relies on its members for its support. Every day we try and bring you an interview that will teach you something that you didn't know about either political philosophy or the way our government works, or the economic system that we live in, or what's going on with the campaigns. And it is your support as a member that makes it possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. As a way of saying thank you, we give you extra content every day. So jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop, Fairtrade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Our longest term advertiser on this program. Probably only been a handful of shows where I've never mentioned their name at the end since day, maybe one. I can't remember. Last night was Tuesday night. Michael, you had a program, is my understanding. What happened?
Indeed. We talked about the Madrigon Collective, which is one of the largest, maybe the largest cooperative business zone in the world in the Basque region of Spain. And it employs a lot of people, and it shows that worker cooperatives not only might be helpful in transitioning economies on a macro scale, but they actually compete pretty well inside the marketplace as it is today as well, while employing more people. Then Brian Mayer, co-editor of Brazil Wire, we talked about the WhatsApp bulk buying scandal and fake news in Brazil. The political...
Wow. That's kind of... I don't know, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, that... I want to get a Lava Jato t-shirt.
I want to get a Lava Jato t-shirt. We also did a little bit of cross-border solidarity and dunked on Jimmy Dore, because Jimmy Dore credulously embraced the car wash Lava Jato investigation.
The vigilant U.S. Imperial PSYOP.
Which literally was an
Sentinel.
arm of the U.S. Justice Department. And part of the breakdown is that while Lula governed in a way that wasn't hurtful to Brazilian business, he certainly pissed off Chevron and Exxon by not letting them drill on Brazilian offshore oils or privatizing Petrobras. And we did that, and we also had a very, very fun postgame.
So wait, so let me just, if I can understand it correctly, if he had actually read into the story he was covering and found out that it was bunk, it would have somehow made Hillary Clinton not look bad, and
it actually would have made Hillary Clinton look bad. That's the thing. He literally had an opportunity to even make Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration look bad. It's
a fucking layup.
He just it was a fucking layup. But because it's apolitical corruption rhetoric, and no one bothers to do any research, they actually ended up doing a video that sort of backed right-wing coup forces in Brazil. And
oops.
And then when we initially commented on it, the response of most of his fans were one of two things, which was either you're being mean or this video's from 2017 and no one could have known, even though it was a year after Dilma was removed from office. But what are you going to do? We're assholes for sure.
God's working on all of us.
Yeah, God's working on all of us.
Super mean.
Yeah,
super mean.
Super mean. And
Jamie, please tell me that the Intifada was not mean this week.
We're never mean, Sam.
There you go.
We act
learn a lesson, Michael.
Purely on only the purest hate, which springs from the purest love.
That's very pretty.
Yeah.
So what sprang forth this week?
So this week on the Intifada, it's coming out tomorrow or Thursday. We talk to our two friends. That's right, folks. Not one, but two guests this week. Andy Battle, a doctoral student in history at the City University of New York, and Sham Khanna, editor-in-chief of Commune magazine. First, we talked to Sham about the awesome media project that they are doing with Commune. And then we talked to Andy Battle, who wrote a great piece on the history of the New York City subway and why it sucks so much. We talked about the tension between urban space to serve human needs and urban space designed to extract profit. From there, we branched out a bit to the decommodification of movement in general, including at the borders of nations. We had a bit of a call to action, some ideas for direct action in that space, as well as what kind of direct action not to do, aka the kind where you take your pants off.
Matt, did you keep your pants on for Literary Hangar?
I did, but I was also mean to Stephen Crowder, who for Prager University made a video saying that there was never a genocide in the United States because A, if you look at any of the battles, they're just battles, and B, there was never any written policy, so there you go. And I found that I looked at the very first battle in New England, and it turned out to look an awful lot like a genocide. And I also found out that Winthrop, the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, had a bit of a reputation for his treaties and the copies of those treaties mysteriously disappearing before he died. So, interesting.
You know, now that we're talking about Stephen Crowder, and I guess let me just give you a sense before we go into the fun half. A couple months ago, I don't know when it was, 4 or 5 months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, I was invited to Politicon. And I'm a little ambivalent about that conference because it, in many ways, just makes politics about entertainment. And, I mean, we do a show like that, but we try and maintain some integrity. We try and be entertaining, but we also try and deliver stuff that is meaningful. And to center a conference around political celebrities rather than, let's say, policy people or activists seems to me to be a little bit dubious. But the other part of that is I'm also aware of the space in which we operate and the reality of where we operate. And many people watch this show on YouTube. And frankly, the right is influencing a lot of young people on this medium. And so my sense was, all right, well, maybe I can, if I go, I can get into a debate with somebody and show some young people who are watching videos. I know a lot of young people do that, and this is where they get their political education. And I did not want certain voices out there to have that whole space to themselves and present a perspective that is, I think, wrong and dangerous and unhealthy for the country, and have no one challenge it. And so when they asked me if I would come, I said, yeah, I will if I can debate someone. And I was trying to think about who I would want to debate. And the first thing that first requirement was I want them to have a YouTube following, because that means that their status is, very largely supported by audiences. And I want to reach their audience. Now, of course, I threw out Dave Rubin, and I was told that he's not coming. And
which was a smart move.
Competition would start kicking in.
Right. Competition would start kicking in. And there was I think at one point they said, what about Milo Yiannopoulos? It was one of the first people they wanted to hook me up. And I was like, no, why would I debate this guy? No one cares about him anymore. No one watches him.
Yeah, I'll debate him for Politicon 2016.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, the point being that my agenda was to separate someone from their audience in some measure. Not the entire audience, just a portion of it that might be gettable. And so we went over a couple of people, and we finally realized, Steven Crowder, he does that thing where he goes to colleges and tries and makes college students look bad because they don't know supposedly what he knows in terms of politics. And so I said Crowder, and the people were like, great, Steven's interested in a debate. And it all looked good. And then at one point, they're writing me back and they're not mentioning Crowder anymore. And I was like, hey, what's going on with the debate with Crowder? What day is that going to be? And they said, can we have a phone call with you? And now here's the thing. In this space, when there's a phone call, people don't want emails released, right? And I was told on this phone call that Steven Crowder ghosted, literally stopped responding to their emails, and decided, and I think the quote was, pretty sure the quote was, somebody got cold feet.
That's
I guess
Cuck Crowder is.
I guess someone finally changed his mind after all.
Now, there was also, and I was like, well, and she said something, the person I spoke to said something to the effect of his team or something, his crew, and apparently his dad is his manager or something. Oh, thank you. And so now I think it was smart of Steven Crowder to avoid debating me at Politicon.
Yeah, he can't just go up there and put on a tutu and say Stalin. It's not going to work. So it was a wise
He has
move.
a sign out here. All right, let's take that out. Nice try. But he has, as you can see, he's sitting out there. He has a sign that says, change my mind. I would like to invite Steven Crowder to come on this program, and I will attempt to change his mind. Or I will go on his program and attempt to change his mind. Or I will meet him anywhere at nearly any time at my expense to have the opportunity to change his mind, with the one stipulation that we record it on video with sound. So, Steven Crowder, if you are 1/16th the man that you purport to be, I am issuing you a very specific challenge to debate you. If I have it wrong that you did not chicken out from debating me at Politicon, like chicken out so much that you decided not to even attend, then we can obviously very easily come together and debate on any topic. So I will host you on any time, on any platform, in any way to debate. And I guess we'll hear. Look, because Stephen, I know you are watching or hearing this. And everybody else knows it too. There's no way you're not aware that I've issued this challenge now. You knew it was coming when you backed out of Politicon because you were afraid of debating me. And here it is. So you know where to find us. MajorityReporters@gmail.com if you want to get us an email, or you can tweet at me. And I will, of course, follow this up with a tweet to you. And I imagine, I don't know if you'll block me or mute me, but I'm sure somebody's going to get you the message. So, Stephen, we'll see you soon.
And maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but you can wear your Not Gay t-shirt and you can have an opening statement, right? You'll let him have the opening statement, I'm assuming.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Right? And also,
I'm willing to have
you can interrupt any time that Sam is lying or get a fact wrong. Gets a fact wrong.
All right, let's take a quick break. Head into the fun half. Be right back.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy, back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy, back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are...
Psych. Fuck them.
Almost says what?
Almost
says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus? I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
The alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report, ladies and gentlemen. It is the fun half, where I spend the first 30 seconds clearing out literally a dozen Russian IM bots from our IM. I don't know why that's the case. I'm not making any, I'm not trying to start World War III. I'm just telling you, for whatever reason, I turn on the IM on my, we get that. All right, let's go to the phones for a moment. You're calling from a 702 area code. Who's this?
Hello, Sam?
Yes?
Oh, hey, Sam. I'm calling from Las Vegas. Hello, Flamingo.
Are you calling from across the room, or what? Are you okay?
Hey, Sam, can you hear me better now? I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, I'm sorry. Who is this?
Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas. What's on your mind?
Just three things. Number one, you murked Charlie Kirk. That was great.
Oh, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
That was great. And congratulations, by the way. I just want to say that the kind of thing that struck me, Sam, maybe you could probably elaborate on this better than I can, is that it just seems like in terms of the right wing or the wing nuts, it almost seems like in the strictest sense, like the talking points are the argument. There is no argument anymore. It's like the talking points are the argument. You know, because it just seems like he was just serving empty platitudes or like right-wing talking points as the argument. It wasn't like connected to like a broader argument. Does that make any sense?
Yes. I don't think that it was necessary for me to be there for him to deliver those lines. Like, he was not responding to anything I was saying. He was throwing out things, and then he, clearly there was some areas that he just didn't know what he was talking about. Like, and we'll probably cover it when we cover the next 20 minutes of the debate. I think that's where some of the most obvious ones were. Like, he didn't know how banks seemed to work. He didn't know the role of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae in particular. He confused them with rating agencies that are private institutions that, in fact, and I'm quite sure that Al Franken was the driving force behind trying to change the way that those rating agencies were paid. And there was a lot of things he didn't seem to understand, but I don't know. If someone came to me and said, in 10 years, oh yeah, Charlie Kirk, he's either does not want to be in public talking about right-wing stuff, like he's just sort of receded from the argument, or he's actually now like, I don't know, he's off doing social work in like third world countries because he's, that wouldn't surprise me, because he there were some things he was inclined, I thought, that were like, his perspective was in the right place. I can't quite tell if he was just trying to follow some type of different template with Trump, but I'm not sure. But what were your other 2 points?
I was going to say, final thing on that. I just felt like sometimes I think just from the way that the rhythm of the debate, he just ceded ground to you because he knew he couldn't argue. I think that's why sometimes he straight up agreed with you, because he just maybe he's trying to differentiate himself. But I just feel like sometimes he just ceded the ground because he's like, look, I'm not even going to go there. There's no point.
Right.
And my second thing is, I'm sure you saw in the news all the bombs that are being mailed to all the Democrats and, politicians and stuff. I said this to Mike. Shout out to Mike. I said this to Mike. When you practice unreality for so long, when I'm talking about the right wing. So when you practice unreality for so long, you foster societal insanity. And I'm 99.9% sure this is some right-wing nut, probably a white guy, ranting about Jews and blacks and the Mexicans and stuff like that. I just think it's time to crack down and prosecute on these white supremacist thugs. And that's just who I think it is. Of course.
Look,
absolutely.
8 years ago, plus, there was a report put out by the Department of Homeland Security that the most prominent threat in terms of terrorism in this country were white supremacist organizations like this, and the Department of Homeland Security got a lot of, and the DOJ got a lot of grief for that. They cut back, I'm sure, on the investigations because of that, because shortly thereafter they were getting
Wait, Sam, also
investigated by
I didn't mean to No, sir, I didn't mean to object. Also, to your point, I don't know if you remember this, in 2006, I think it was the FBI released a report that white supremacist organizations were infiltrating police departments around the country.
Yeah. Yep.
So basically what I'm saying is we are seeing a resurgence of white supremacy. And I'm talking about in all areas of society. Just for example, even the Kavanaugh hearing, that was literally, I know this may sound a little bit crazy, but literally the Kavanaugh hearing was just programming and engineering society. Like, look, these white guys, they're off limits. You can't prosecute them. You know what I'm saying? Whatever. Basically, what we need to do is start prosecuting these guys, full stop. We need to start investigating. Like, for example, Dylan Roof, who was he talking to? He was talking to somebody online. I mean, he was radicalized online, which is strange because I think there was a report that talked about how ISIS recruits are radicalized online, you know?
But, Bro Flamingo, we're not going, that's not going to happen under this administration. I mean, my point being that the Obama administration, the DOJ and the DHS were basically intimidated away from doing further investigations, which I'm sure would have involved which would have involved getting a sense of what the networks of these people were. And
absolutely,
they were intimidated away from it by a Republican Congress, and it metastasized. I mean, the only thing interesting, well, I don't know if that's that's the right word, but the only thing that's interesting about what's happening now is that usually we see this resurgence when Democrats are in power. The interesting dynamic here is that these people are ostensibly in power, and I think the difference is that because they are being openly, usually they're openly courted when the Republicans are out of power, but the Republicans are continuing to openly court them in a way, and
Absolutely.
Maybe that's why we're seeing more of them now. But listen, I appreciate the phone call. Thanks, man. Thanks for the compliment.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. All right, we'll take one more phone call, and then we'll go to a couple of clips, and then we'll do the debate. You are calling from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, this is Jeff in Georgia. How you doing today?
Jeff in Georgia. How are you, sir?
Hey, man, I'm doing fine. Listen, it appears Steven Crowder has less masculine fortitude than a literal diaper-wearing man baby, and I think that's a sad day for him. I think maybe he should take you up on his offer. Challenge if he doesn't want to be pilloried endlessly by yours truly.
I am willing to even send him a year's supply of Pampers if he does this.
I believe he's a Huggies guy, Sam. You might want to do a little bit better Oppo research on
I'll do
man.
a little bit.
But listen, speaking of that lizard-faced homunculus Charlie Kirk, you did end up talking to. Really enjoyed your debate. I know you're going to get to it too. My favorite part that you're going to get to, of course, is when Charlie starts sputtering about how the feds under W didn't do an adequate job at regulating the big banks, which I think is not a very strong right-wing talking point. I think you tripped him up real bad. I think you inhibited his career, and I think I'm damn fine proud of you, Sam.
Oh, well,
I think you did a good job. I think next time the only reason I'd give you a B+ is because at no point did you throw a banana cream pie with a big old rock in the middle at his face.
Well,
that would have been a real kicker, man.
Pieing him was we hadn't contemplated pieing him, not with a rock, but it did look like I might get into something with some of the fans at one point towards the end there. But
yeah, that was genuinely tense.
I
like that.
Well,
I was
listen, man, if you
do
need
not
any
step
debate,
to post-divorce debate Sam.
That's right.
Don't come at him
if
with
you
your
need any debate
nonsense.
consultant, you can go to patreon.com/distant Sam. I'll hook you up, man. I'll give you all the pointers, man. I'll have you throwing pies like nobody's business, man. I just want to tell you, welcome back. I'm real proud of you. Everybody become a member of the Majority Report, support independent media, and y'all have a good one now, okay?
Jeff from Georgia.
There you go. Folks should check out, thank you, Jeff. Folks should check out Dissident Peasant, his Francis Perkins series. Do you know Francis Perkins was from Worcester?
No, really?
She went to the same high school as my parents did.
That's cool.
Not simultaneously, because she was considerably older.
Are there any? Who else is a prominent?
Abby Hoffman went to that same high school, classical high school.
Right. There you go. You must be fascinated. I'm surprised you haven't made an Abby Hoffman movie, actually.
Glad you asked that question, Michael, even though it's not a question.
More of a statement, but whatever works.
Robert Greenwald, the guy from the guy who did the Walmart movie and the Fox movie, and he made a movie about Abby Hoffman that Janine Garofalo was in, and I auditioned for that movie. And for the part of the reporter, and they ended up using a Canadian actor because you have to use a certain amount of Canadian actors when you shoot up in Canada. The movie was not great. I like Robert, but the movie was not great.
I saw that movie.
Yeah, I mean,
it was all right.
It was not great. It was okay, but it was just a little too biopic-y for me. Now, I was a huge Abby Hoffman fan and aficionado because he was from Worcester. My parents knew him. I met him when I was in college. We brought him to speak to the school. He was on tour at that time, like around the time he was touring with Amy Carter?
I think so.
Amy Carter?
Because Amy Carter was doing ants.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if it was Amy Carter. It was definitely around that time. It was
with
very
Latin
before
America, right?
Yeah, before that. Well, they were doing a lot of stuff. I mean, his big talk, and this was 1987, maybe somewhere around there. And he was saying, maybe it was 1988, and he was saying that this is like 1968. And it turned out it was not. And it was a little bit sad, and it was before, it was in the year or so before he committed suicide. And, but yes, Abby Hoffman, I was upset about the movie because I wanted to make a Abby Hoffman movie, and thought I was pretty well situated.
I think today,
coming from Worcester,
particularly now, I think that just his radicalism, but also that he was he was a performer. There was an entertainment aspect. I don't know that much about him, but it feels like this sort of dirtbag, whatever thing we're doing with comedy and leftism owes something to him.
Definitely. And I think like the movie, the problem I had the movie with was that it was shot too traditionally. And it did not do service to what I thought was his energy.
Not traditional energy.
Yeah, I just like,
Not at all.
like I like, and the way that I shot things, back when I was shooting things was all more handheld, and I got into video shooting for film. Was to give myself a little on the shoulder. I was on the vanguard of that. All right, but that was a different time, and now, we got a couple of things. First off, let's start with this. So today we have reports that I think now close to a half a dozen. No, it's a seventh bomb now has been sent to a congressional mail facility. So George Soros yesterday, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, CNN, Eric Holder, apparently Cuomo. There's reason to believe this person is based in New York because they put the Soros one, I think they did that they hand delivered it, is my understanding. I'm not sure. So there could be up to 7 bombs, but yesterday was Soros, a bomb in his mailbox. Today, this morning, was this Fox News clip. Timing, not so great. But remember now, they're ignoring the fact that a bomb was put into someone's mailbox, and they're trying to develop a false equivalence with that bomb, attempted bombing, with disrupting a meal.
My fear is that intimidation turns to violence, and I agree with what's been said here. Both sides need to ramp it down. The good news is...
Now, who is this dude? What's the guy's name? This guy who's talking? He is on Fox News Live, and the chyron is McConnell defiant after protester disrupts dinner, and this is Brad Blakeman. He is the former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. The restaurant confrontation, McConnell defiant after protest disrupts dinner. Here we go.
And I agree with what's been said here. Both sides need to ramp it down. The good news is you're right. The vast majority of Americans don't buy into this.
Well, we have some breaking news now. I mean, along the same vein, we've got a statement from Sarah Sanders on these suspicious packages. Roll it, guys. Fox News alert now. Here's the statement from Sarah Sanders from the White House a moment ago. We condemn the attempted violent attacks recently made against President Obama, President Clinton, Secretary Clinton, other public figures. These terrorizing acts are despicable, and anyone responsible will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law.
Okay, I want you to like how, first of all, Fox News is comparing getting a dinner disrupted with someone planting a bomb. And then the despicable Sarah Huckabee Sanders tries to create an equivalence between the terrorizing that's happening in the restaurants, the terrorizing, and the delivering of bombs to people's houses. So that is ridiculous. The idea that you would equate those two things is really stunning.
I mean, an upset meal and a pipe bomb. Everybody needs to take a chill pill.
Right. Everybody's got to just calm down. You can't disrupt someone's dinner by being, by saying, not nice things.
About the not nice things that they did.
Right. And also, while you're disrupting dinner, don't put bombs in people's homes. Unbelievable.
They're setting up for a crackdown.
That is like fascist Obama. It's like some on one extreme disrupts Mitch McConnell's steak. On another, there's pipe bombs being sent around the country.
Right.
People on both sides of this need to calm down. Remember, we're all in this together.
Right. We've never, I remember, can you, just for a moment, imagine what these people would be saying with the Tea Partiers who would show up at healthcare town halls with weapons. If they would even deign to do a false equivalence between that and someone putting a bomb somewhere. Like, the idea of even bringing that up would have been, how dare you?
Concerned Americans.
Concerned Americans.
I remember there was a Bill Maher segment where he talked about this dynamic several years ago before it even got here, and Reihan Salam, in very conservative whataboutist fashion, was mentioned the weathermen, and Bill Maher looked at him and he literally was like, he's like, dude, you weren't even born yet.
Right.
Like, what are you talking about?
Right. That's the equivalent. There you go.
And to their credit, I haven't heard too many liberals telling activists to stop disrupting people's dinner.
No,
I've heard a few of them. Haven't heard any of them equate the two things.
No, I don't think so. We should let's do this story too for let's do clip number one. This is when CNN was actually interrupted because it was revealed while they were in studio. They're reporting on suspicious packages sent to Clinton and Obama. At this point, they did not realize it was these were explosive devices. And then this happens.
They're no longer suspicious packages. The FBI is saying that they were rudimentary but functional. That means they were explosive devices. And to have projectiles, I mean, that sounds like a fire alarm here. We'll keep you posted on that. But to have projectiles, that is a feature you will often see in bombs that terrorists use in Afghanistan, elsewhere. ISIS has used that kind of bomb before. It doesn't mean it's exclusive just to those kinds of terrorist groups, but that is a significant development. Tom Fuentes, if you're still hearing us here, they're connected now. The bombs targeting Soros, Clinton, Obama, and the White House. The FBI says that they were functional. How significant?
Well, it's significant that it wasn't just a hoax then. If the bombs are capable of exploding, they're capable of, inflicting bodily harm or death on somebody. So it's more than just sending a hoax just to get, public attention, the equivalent of pulling a fire alarm like maybe somebody just did in your building. But if it's an explosive device, it's more than just an idle threat or something to try to get attention. It's an actual device that could hurt somebody.
Okay, we're going to jump in. There's a fire alarm here.
You might have heard it in the background. We're going to find out what the latest is
we'll be
here
right back.
at CNN. We're going to be right back.
And then they went to break, and the next time we heard from them, they were out on the streets because, of course, that fire alarm was a function of a bomb being found at CNN. So this is where we're at. I mean, it's let's play this clip from Jeff Flake. Do you have that, Matt, on the IM?
It's right on the IMs. It's just speaking of false equivalencies and somebody showing their true colors.
Yeah, I mean, look, here is a classic example of this. Both sides. Jeff Flake, who came into office in the Tea Party wave, as it were, and here he is claiming that there is some type of equivalency between protesters who have had no incidents of violence in any shape or form around politicians or at these restaurants. There's been no violence. There hasn't been any arrests, to my knowledge, when we're talking about these incidents with Ted Cruz or Mitch McConnell. When they go to the restaurant, there's not even been an arrest. And I suspect that they would be happy to call for the arrest of somebody had they done anything that was in any way remotely violent.
I don't know. I heard some of them were violently embarrassed.
Yes, they may have been violently embarrassed, but there was no arrest. And here is Jeff Flake trying to create some type of false equivalence in reaction to the news of explosive devices mailed to former President Obama, to former Secretary of State Clinton. Here's Jeff Flake.
Well, obviously, it's horrible. That anytime anybody's threatened like this is not good. So there's been a lot of this going around lately. But we've got to tone down the rhetoric. Both sides.
Pause it. I want to be clear or something. I want to be clear. When you send someone a bomb, that's not a threat. Right?
It's not rhetorical.
That's not rhetorical. That's not certain actions will happen. It is an action in and of itself. The fact that the bomb didn't go off and kill anybody does not make it a threat. It's still an attempted bombing. But you roll it back a little bit on Jeff Flake.
Anytime anybody's threatened like this is not good. So there's been a lot of this going around lately. But we've got to tone down the rhetoric, both sides. Got to see people as opponents but not enemies.
Yeah, both sides got to tone down the rhetoric.
Yeah, bombs are rhetoric now.
Yep. Both sides have got to turn down the rhetoric.
Heated rhetoric.
All right,
they're not afraid to get physical.
Let's play this last clip. The other story, of course, in the news is the Republican Party's insistence, and it's not even just the Republican Party. Actually, put up this DHS thing. This is pretty stunning. The Department of Homeland Security tweets out here. Let's see the separate ones here. First, what they do is Department of Homeland Security Tyler Holton tweets: citizens of countries outside of Central America, including countries in the Middle East, Africa, South Asia, and elsewhere, are currently traveling through Mexico toward the U.S. And And that is presumably, right? Like that almost sounds like they're coming in that caravan, coming through Mexico to come to the U.S. People from the Middle East, Africa, South Asia, very dangerous spots. And Sarah Sanders Huckabee, the press secretary, amplifies this message. Department of Homeland Security says people from the Middle East, Africa, South Asia, and elsewhere are currently traveling through Mexico toward the U.S. Needless to say, this wouldn't be happening if the Democrats for once did their jobs and joined Republicans to fully fund the wall. I don't even... If there was a wall, guess what these people would be doing? They'd be doing the exact same thing, and it wouldn't prohibit people from joining them. But put that aside. The point is, she's just doing this to emphasize that the Department of Homeland Security, this is not political, folks. The Department of Homeland Security is telling you that these outsiders are traveling ostensibly through this caravan. Well, and then reporter Jennifer Epstein asked if this tweet applied to people in the caravan. A DHS official said, quote, "The tweet speaks for itself, but we cannot release the data due to law enforcement sensitivities."
Yep. Gotta be careful.
My favorite sensitivity.
Gotta be careful. You can't
And
just...
that tweet specifically does not say there are people in this caravan. It simply says that there are people who are not Mexican, who are probably traveling toward the U.S. in Mexico, which would be anybody in Mexico traveling north would be traveling toward the U.S., not necessarily heading there as a destination. But the idea that there are people in Mexico who are not Mexican seems fairly self-evident. And the idea that over the course of a day, they might face north and take a step also seems to be unworthy of alarm, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty amazing the extent in which they'll use the U.S. Official security apparatus as a low-rent political operation.
World War II inheritance.
There you go. Domestically, too. Except for, guess what? We're not at war with Mexico.
No.
Not yet.
Yeah.
We're not at war with Mexico, Sam. I like the new Charlie Kirk move.
That's a good one. All right, lastly, before
you
we
are
get to
aware
the
of
Charlie
that.
Kirk stuff, it is nice to see at least one individual who is sort of trying to say reality check here on cable news. And CNN seems to need a decent amount of this. And what's fascinating about this is you're going to see what the problem with cable news and with just news more broadly when dealing with this type of just complete lie and this complete hijacking of U.S. official apparatus in terms of the way they speak to the public. Because this almost isn't even propaganda, right? Like you can say in World War II, we would propagandize our own people, and we certainly propagandize our own people in many ways, but never has such an enormous effort made to propagandize the American public for such a small goal. Right? Like, it's one thing to say, like, we're going to propagandize you because the greater mission of capitalism and national security and et cetera, et cetera. This is much, much more petty that they're using this apparatus for. I mean, talk about lowering the bar. But here is a CNN pundit speaking out.
It's 1,000 miles away. 1,000 miles.
Wait, go back a little bit. We need to just hear a little bit how they're trying to build this up before he comes in.
Wait a second.
Yeah, here
the president there in the Oval Office, such a different sense of urgency and certainty to him than when I heard him last night at that Houston rally when he was, essentially saying they were knocking on the door of the border. That's not true. They Wait are a second. Miles and miles and miles away. And the reality here is, one second, Jeffrey. The reality is that the president is trying to galvanize Republicans, and I think it's working. It worked in 2016, and immigration is a hot-button issue, and so that's what he is trying to do. Not that it's not a serious problem that needs to be solved, but it's not an urgent problem like he says it is.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
It's 1,000 miles away. 1,000 miles. You know how long it takes to walk 1,000 miles? I mean, this whole thing is absurd. It is a completely manufactured, appeal to the ugliest sentiments of Trump's coalition. The idea that we are under threat from these poor, desperate people is just absurd. And, the lies that he keeps telling about who's in this group with no proof at all. I mean, it is just the bottom of the barrel politics that he's engaged in. And frankly, I wonder about our complicity in just talking about this as if this is some kind of close to immediate threat.
But he is the president of the United States. You can't ignore what the president of the United States says.
I understand that, but we can focus on some things more than others, and I think this transparent attempt to create a crisis where none exists. I mean, yes, it is good that we're calling it out, and this is a struggle that we've had with covering Donald Trump from the very beginning. Do you cover every tweet? Do you cover every lie? I don't have the answer to that, but this one on the eve of the election is so grotesque that there's something that's even worse about this when you talking about it at all, but then adding the lies is just unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, okay, now, so all right, what's fascinating about this is, first off, I can tell you that the one thing that you don't do on cable news, if you want to keep your job, is question the premise of the segment. Right? Like that's like you can, there's no, there may be like hiring decisions that are based on ideology. I don't know. I honestly don't know about that. But the only thing I do know is that they get upset about is like when you say like, what are we doing here? Why are we talking about this? That's when everybody then gets really bummed out. That's when you generally is like, oh, damn it. No, you're not supposed to do that. And I had a moment like that on a show that I was never invited back on. We were just talking about it today, actually. And it was actually a very similar thing. It was over the Ebola stuff. I was on the Al Sharpton show, and Ebola was supposed to be one question of like 5. And the question was going to be, why, Sam, are the Republicans so focused on Ebola? And literally before he goes to me, on the screen, they show a helicopter view of the nurse who had Ebola being transported in an ambulance to the hospital, to the airport. And Sharpton was like, why are they covering Ebola? Why do the Republicans keep talking about Ebola? And I'm like, well, it's on the screen right now. And that's what you can't do. But the bottom line is, why can't we ignore what the president says? I mean, obviously, you can't completely ignore it. But once it's been established that what the president is saying is completely fabricated and completely irrelevant, you simply say the president is talking about some caravan that has nothing to do with American security today. Meanwhile, blankety blank is happening, right? I mean, the media has to figure this out because it cannot exclusively be basically a vehicle for propaganda that they know is propaganda and lies.
Yeah, just why is the president focusing on this? Here's the polling data that suggests that the Republican Party is driven by racial animus. There's a segment.
There's multiple ways of sort of covering this by covering another angle that's more interesting. I mean, we're doing that now in terms of media critique, but at the end of the day, I don't care what Donald Trump is saying other than it speaks about who the Republican Party is. So
ironically, the guy's giving it to you. I mean, the Republican on the panel is basically saying
this
is good for the midterms.
That's a reporter.
Oh, that's a reporter?
That's a reporter.
Well, okay. Well, the reporter is unintentionally, I think, showing the store there.
Exactly.
Right.
But really what you should have is like a couple other people who are on like, let's talk about demagoguery. Let's talk about the polling that shows how racist these people are. Let's talk about this lady in Minneapolis who thinks that her lake house is going to be occupied by people who are thousands of miles away and charging at her on foot with a 4-year-old on their shoulders.
Well, it's the LBJ make the son of a bitch deny it thing, because you basically force the media to use their finite resources of time to, even if they're debunking it, they're still talking about it.
Yeah, but debunking, as we were saying, is a hell of a step up. And then all Wolf has is, he said it.
He said it. He's the president.
When you do it, it's the president. You have to say it.
This is one problem, though, with these ostensibly neutral platforms in the mainstream media, which, aren't totally neutral, but like they do feel an obligation to try and show both sides, right? But like, what do you do when one side is unprintable conspiracy theory racist garbage?
I mean, that's the thing, is like, how do you prove beyond saying like they're 1,000 miles away, they're a caravan of families who are afraid, that's why they're a caravan. So like, how do you prove it beyond having proved it? That is the dilemma. And
move on.
And then they got to move on. And if they need to talk about it, then you talk about it. Like, why is it happening?
Yeah.
Why is he lying?
They might call that bias, what we might call analysis, but there's no such thing as a neutral news outlet anyway. So maybe they need to own that a little more, because like, real talk, the people that they are trying to cover, like they did that profile of Identity Europa the other night, like they don't believe in liberal values like freedom of speech or news that checks the facts. And they use liberal platforms in liberal societies to take over and impose, like, I don't want to call them fascists per se, but definitely some fascism-like qualities. And it's really scary.
It is. All right. Let's now, we're going to, and so look, how do I start this here? Yesterday, we played a clip from the debate that I had with Charlie Kirk at Politicon. And as we were playing it, it was a TYT recording. 20 minutes was missing, and it was 20 minutes in the middle of the debate. And it came in at about 20 minutes in, right?
About 24, yeah.
And so what we're going to do, and we're playing the debate and we're giving commentary. We were going to try and stitch it in, but then we realized, like, wait, I'm wearing a different shirt. And so we want to put this video out there. If you, in particular, if you are a young person and you come across Charlie Kirk, you should know that a lot of what he says is not really sound. And we're going through this debate to show you that. It's really a lot less. This debate, at least in my mind, is a lot less about me beating Charlie Kirk or winning a debate or whatever it is. Or murking. What is it?
Murking, yeah.
Murking.
Yes, murking. Just go with that in general, Sam.
It was really more about giving folks who are not aware of what he is selling more insight into this product being defective and, maybe some decent packaging. But when you start to dig into it, it's not very substantial. But so here is the middle segment of the debate, and then we'll just run into the to the beginning of the debate. So forgive us, but this is what it is. We're picking up now. We're talking, I think, about taxes, right? And then we're going to get into regulations.
No, you're right. So tax cut, where an average middle-class family had a $2,700 tax cut, where you have the corporate rate that went from 35% effective.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, I said in the other debate, and we should also say that we're speeding it up so that people can go through this, without spending hours. The average tax cut was $2,700. but the median far less, closer to 800. So when you add together the tax cuts of the millionaires and the billionaires with the middle class, the average is $2,700. Just like if Bill Gates and I were in a room, our average net worth would be $30 billion. But I got to tell you, I did not win the Mega Millions last night, so I don't even have hundreds of millions at this point. But continue.
A lot of corporations did not pay that. They used loopholes, of which I disagree with completely. Went down to 20% effective in January, and they used that money to invest in capital infrastructure, or they repatriate
stock buybacks.
So
they're using the money to buy
not exclusively. So stock buybacks. How about companies where the actual employees own the stock, and their own net worth goes up? Aren't they part of the middle class?
I am sure there are some members of the middle class who benefited from the tax cut.
That's what I'm saying, Sam.
The overwhelming thrust of the tax cuts goes into the wealthiest pockets via either stock buybacks or through capital gains or through having an S corp and paying less in taxes. So look, we could cherry pick things. You can say Illinois. I could say the worst 16, the lowest 15 states in the country in terms of education are all run by Republican governors, except for Louisiana, which had Bobby Jindal for 8 years, up until 2016. But cherry picking doesn't work. You wouldn't. There's a lot of things.
The idea of zero-sum game, though. The zero-sum game.
You wouldn't like me to cherry pick.
That's why I was trying to get.
Pause it. Now, let me just say here. Now, I don't know if this was appropriate on my part. By cherry picking in his organization, I think in my mind at the time, I will cop to this, I was going to maybe bring up the fact that his number two for a couple of years at this organization, who he went on to praise and praise and praise, turned out had to be fired only after it was leaked by someone else that she was writing all sorts of things that were of racist sentiment. Things like, I hate blacks. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. I fucking hate blacks. Or cherry picking like, the Florida division of his organization, which, had a private sort of Slack or WhatsApp saying, don't mention Richard Spencer too much. He was a guy who was just accused of domestic abuse in addition to being a white supremacist. And don't use the N-word too much. And let's see if I get this quote, don't hate Jews just because too much.
Well,
so you could either hate Jews just because, or you could hate Jews if you had reasons too much, but or that they were kicked off some campuses because they were funneling in thousands of dollars of dark money to influence student government campaigns so that they could, and also he was caught up in something where he was intimidating some left-wing voices on college campuses. I probably
with Niall Ferguson.
Huh?
That was with Niall Ferguson.
Right, with Niall Ferguson.
Yeah, that was fun.
I don't know if I should have brought that up or not. Maybe it was wrong of me to sort of do it in that context. But that's what I was alluding to. I just want to cop to it. All right, continue.
The philosophical difference, because I don't believe when someone gets rich, someone inherently gets more poor.
You can talk philosophy, but we don't need to. But we have data.
Okay, but the data. Right, so the data. Fine, Sam, if you want to talk data.
And Charlie, I'm going to give you the last word on this.
Yeah, but I mean, so again, I was thinking maybe, because again, you were just talking about cherry picking, and then you were cherry picking, and I was trying to talk about philosophy, which is, I don't believe in a zero-sum game. I believe in a market economy. When you trade, both parties equally get richer when you trade, and standard of living goes up, prices go down, and you have abundance. You have an abundance problem, not a scarcity problem in the West. But I'm trying to, maybe I'm failing to understand how, because the left seems so adamantly opposed to the policies that have delivered us a 4.2% GDP rate, the lowest ever black unemployment rate, the lowest ever Asian American unemployment rate, the lowest Hispanic unemployment rate, the lowest veterans unemployment since 2001, a $2,700 average middle class tax cut, and the economy is so good, Obama's trying to take credit for it. And so, but Sam, can you give some credence to the idea that when you lessen government burden, you couple that with a massive deregulation, the largest deregulation agenda in 100 years, are you willing to give an inch to say that maybe something Trump has done has benefited the well-being of people in the middle class?
All right, well, you keep repeating the same thing, and I keep explaining.
And it doesn't make it less true, Sam.
Well, it makes it, I'm explaining to you why it's irrelevant. Because, yes, there has been a trajectory where we have seen all of the unemployment gains that you've talked about. We have seen stagnant wages. That is a fact. The buying power of the middle class has dropped. You talk about rolling back regulations. Let's talk about that.
That's good. Let's talk about that. I'm glad.
I want you to name 3 regulations that have been rolled back that have helped the middle class. And I'll name 3 that have hurt the middle class.
How about rolling back Obama's war on coal?
Okay.
That has created hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout Appalachia and brought down utility costs in over 30 states.
What?
Pause it for a minute. I should probably let that roll because
Could you let that be a drop, first of all? What? That needs
That's
to be
like
a drop.
full-on key change.
The folks who lived in West Virginia and Appalachia in the audience, everyone started laughing at Charlie Kirk at that moment. You can just simply go and Google coal jobs created and
hundreds of thousands.
Well,
Almost a million jobs.
I actually did J. Cole, and it gave me
You should
what's
listen to
happening
him.
with the rapper.
J. Cole's really good.
Coal jobs created in the news, and you will see that there has been maybe like somewhere around 3,000 jobs that have been added with coal across the country. I mean, you're still seeing like...
well, you see his point.
Yes.
So I think you would concede jobs.
There was, there's a new round, this is from the Tribune Review, new round of grants will help coal-impacted communities. There's been 120 jobs created from that. I mean, there's probably, thousands of coal jobs maybe that have returned, but not hundreds of thousands. But here, continue.
Okay.
That has created hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout Appalachia and brought down utility costs in over 30 states.
What?
Yes. So this is a
People
big,
laughing in the front.
I smile and I'm happy when the people of West Virginia actually have jobs. Unlike what Hillary Clinton said, we're going to destroy all your jobs and we're going to find another way to give you meaning.
That's one.
And also, if you go to the EPA agenda, there was a specific regulation under the Obama era that categorized lakes and tributaries in the backyards of certain farmers as oil spills. That's number 2. And
I'm sorry, wait, walk us through this by saying you can't dump.
Yes, Sam, being
chemicals?
condescending about a fact does not make it any less true. So under the Obama era.
Well, wait a second. I'm just asking you, walk us through how having farmers dump pesticides in tributaries.
Okay, that's not what I said. They classified lakes and tributaries in the backyards of certain farms as oil spills, which is a complete miscategorization and abuse of the Clean Water Act of 1976. So that was a abuse of power under what I like to call the Employment Prevention Agency.
And how many
or
jobs do you
the Environmental Protection Agency?
That were created by that?
Well, it definitely saved all these farmers hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal costs and the fact that they can still be operating. Would you like more regulation, Sam? How about
one more?
How about the thousands of consumer regulations that were finally rolled back under the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau so that we do not have to go through excessive amount of regulation to get small business loans? Happy to defend that any single day. I'm happy to defend the deregulatory agenda of Trump against the excessive regulatory agenda of Obama.
So
there's 3.
First off, all right, so first off, let's just start with this. Donald Trump has not rolled back that many regulations. That's the reality. The rate in which our regulations have grown has definitely been slowed. He's done about half of new regulations that Obama and Bush did up to this point. That is true. But let's talk first about the regulation that you mentioned in terms of the coal-fired power plants. This will cause 3,600 deaths, 90,000 cases of asthma, 1,700 heart attacks. The expenses associated with this are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The mercury and air toxins rollback will cause 11,000 deaths annually. The asbestos rollbacks will cost up to 40,000 annual deaths. The EPA, the Trump EPA, says that for every $1 worth of regulation that costs an industry or whatnot, $14 of economic growth are generated. What's an example of that? Light bulbs. For years, conservatives were angry about light bulbs. I don't know if people here are old enough to remember this. But the idea that the U.S. government would require more efficient light bulbs was the loss of liberty to a scope that we can't even imagine. What has happened is consumers have saved tens of millions of dollars because they don't have to replace these incandescent light bulbs. We've seen in terms of in terms of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau saved consumers $90 million worth of bank fees in the last year of the Obama administration alone.
Pause it for 1 second. This is incorrect. I misspoke. It did not save consumers $90 million worth of fees. It saved consumers in the last year $900 million. Over the course of the life of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, up until the Trump administration basically stopped all of its investigatory actions, its attempts to stop, malfactors like Wells Fargo and whatnot. It saved consumers and returned to consumers $13 billion. $13 billion with a B. But continue.
Real quick.
So I misstated that number.
Real quick. Do you think Charlie took that the employment prevention line? Did he test that with his mom first? I'm just having a little bit of that's a very funny joke,
that's
Charlie.
That's a very funny joke.
You use that when you debate that mean man from Sex and the City.
That's the type of line that's useful if you're doing dumb radio.
His whole thing sounded like in that moment like a campaign speech.
It was but you're right. It was a little morning zoo too, because he also is really. I didn't notice this as much at first, but he's very in the school of if I'm wrong or I've said something that just doesn't sound credible. If I raise my voice
and act like the teacher,
and act like I'm no, I will double down on that. Then that confidence will power me through nonsense.
It also seems like some capitalists might be sneaking into the nebulous middle class category when he talks about the people who own farms and businesses, right?
All right, let's let him go.
The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau saved consumers $90 million worth of bank fees in the last year of the Obama administration alone. There has not been one enforcement action since the Trump administration has taken over.
So what's the CFPB budget?
What is the budget? It is completely funded by fees that they get from the bank.
So forcibly take money away from the people that are depositor and then say that they're saving $90 million of fees on the back.
That's not the way it works.
Pause it for 1 second. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was set up in a way that would inoculate it from a Republican House, or let's say a Democratic House that was in some way hostile to it. But it clearly was set up to avoid pressure from politicians because it is self-funding. Its funds, its operational funds, come from fees it collects from banks. But then Charlie has a problem with that because he thinks that's unconstitutional because Congress can't defund it. But here.
When you deposit your money.
So the banks make money by people putting money in
pause
it.
You got to go back here because this is also really important for people to understand. Charlie does not seem to understand how banks make money, or he assumes that depositors would have to pay these fees to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But when you deposit money, they may charge you some bank fees. Your checking account, maybe you get a free checking account. Maybe you get an ATM fee or whatnot. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau actually also capped those, but I think the Republicans rolled that back. So you get fees for putting your money in there, but these are not fees that are associated with their fees to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The bank doesn't take your money to pay these fees. They have to pay it out of their profits.
You are aware that the money in the bank doesn't just sit there, Sam.
Well, here we go.
Worth of bank fees in the last year of the Obama administration alone. There has not been one enforcement action since the Trump administration has taken over.
So what's the CFPB budget?
What is the budget? It is completely funded by fees that they get from the bank.
So forcibly take money away from the people that are depositor and then say that they're saving $90 million of fees on the back.
That's not the way it works. When you deposit your money.
So the banks make money by people putting money in it, and then they borrow it out. So those are depositors. So you're taxing the depositors to then put on the back end of a government agency that is run in and the CFPB should be completely abolished. It's an unconstitutional agency. And it's used as a weapon.
Bankers do not loan out their depositors' money exclusively. That's why you have capital controls. They loan out a lot
exclusively. That is one form and function of a bank.
But it goes back to you.
Well, obviously it goes back to, most of the money in your bank's actually not in there, Sam? You know that, yes. Right? Okay, that's the way a bank works. So you have the FDIC that insures it up to a certain amount, but that money is probably somewhere else in the economy on loan or on lien to somewhere else to try to make the bank money. So when you're taxing the bank to try to fund the CFPB, you're actually taxing the depositors. You're taxing the money within the bank. The bank is comprised of the people that put the money in the bank.
No, you're taxing the profits they make off of their loan.
And they make So let's talk about banking. So first of all, they make money off of.
Let's stay with regulation.
Okay, Sam, they make money. They make money off of most of the money that banks used to make until Dodd-Frank was off lending to small businesses and local communities. But Dodd-Frank completely obliterated the idea of the local community bank. We have seen a sharp decline in community banks.
We have not seen a sharp decline in community banks unless you look over the past 30 years where we have seen a precipitous decline in those banks because of mergers and acquisitions.
Right. So we saw it. I will repeat myself because it's correct. Since the financial crisis, Dodd-Frank was a weapon used against small community banks that has hundreds of millions of dollars of regulation that put on small and local community banks. You know who loves Dodd-Frank? You know who's lobbying against the repeal of Dodd-Frank? Something that you and I can agree with. Goldman Sachs, which completely own the Treasury Department in both administrations, by the way, whether it be the Bush administration, the Obama administration, or the Trump administration. Goldman Sachs has an inside-out access to the Treasury Department. They are lobbying against a repeal of Dodd-Frank. Now, why would that possibly be? Because Dodd-Frank is used as a hedge against small and community banks to protect the Wells Fargos of the world, the J.P. Morgan Chases, and the Goldman Sachs. And so they use regulation as a competitive edge.
Will you join me in calling for a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act? We can deal with government. We can deal with government.
I would actually. I think we should get rid of the carried interest deduction. I think you and I could agree.
Pause it now. Now listen. This is sort of stunning.
That's amazing. I will join you in supporting another thing that will massively benefit wealthy investors.
Well, no. The carried interest deduction is something that we should be repealing. It is so completely far afield from the Glass-Steagall that at that moment I realized he doesn't know any of what I'm talking about. I don't think he knows what a 21st century Glass-Steagall was. I'm not even convinced that he knows what the original Glass-Steagall was. So, Charlie, if you're listening, I'm going to tell you right now, and you can all obviously look this up. But Glass-Steagall was a law that was put in place following the crash of the banks in the Great Depression. And basically what it does, the original didn't do exactly this, but it would do more or less this. It constrained commercial banks from joining with investment banks so that commercial banks where people have their money invested was not subject to the same risks that an investment bank would take. Because if a commercial bank goes under, a big one, a lot of people lose their money. I mean, you're federally insured, and that came in after the Great Depression, up to $250,000. But all that money can be wiped out, which put not only a big strain on the government, of course, but on all sorts of businesses that have more than $250,000 maybe in the accounts. And so the idea is separate these two things so that these banks won't be too big to fail, that their failure will not bring down the entire economy, and that more speculative business will be separated from the more conventional vanilla business. The carried interest loophole has nothing to do with commercial banks or investment banks. It has to do with hedge fund managers. And hedge fund managers, what they do, this is private equity. They go out and they get a bunch of rich people and they say, let me manage your money. We'll go and we'll do maybe venture capital, or we'll make some bets against other companies, whatever. This is what hedge funds do, all sorts of different things. But the managers of these hedge funds escape paying taxes on the money they make by claiming that even though all they're doing is managing other people's money, that it's like their money. And so they get all right, let's say I'm managing $500 million and I take 1% of what I'm managing and what I earn. And I am taking capital gains as if I have invested money, but I'm not investing money. I'm just managing that money. And that's the carried interest loophole. They call it carried interest because they want to make up a name that makes it sound like I'm just a financial advisor. And I don't need to be taxed on that money at a wage rate. I want to be taxed on it at a capital gains rate because it's much lower. I'm glad he's for getting rid of the carried interest loophole, but it has absolutely nothing to do with what we were talking about, which leads me to believe he doesn't know any of what we were talking about. I mean, it literally is the equivalent of saying, like, I'm going to open up a dog kennel. Well, I'm against opening up a dog kennel, but I do like cats.
It's sort of like talking to a bot online.
It's weird.
Yeah, but government sacks, that's my son. Boom.
I continue.
It's completely different from what I've just asked you.
Well, it's a component of what many people on your side. No, I will not join you in a 21st century Glass-Steagall life. No.
Why?
All right, hold on, guys.
If you want to cut down on the power of the big banks, why wouldn't you?
Well, okay, so you would.
But if you're sincere,
why
wouldn't
walk
you
me through?
want the one way that would actually cut into the size and the power of those banks?
Because it wouldn't do that. Because every single time you try to penalize the power of Wall Street, every single time you try to use government to go after the people that have the power, the exact opposite happens.
Pause it. Let me give you a great example of when that didn't happen. After the Great Depression and for the subsequent 65 years that we had that regime. It was only after the Clinton administration when we had a Republican Congress and Senate and a president who was extremely close to the banking industry. In fact, his Treasury Secretary was a guy named Robert Rubin, who wanted to get rid of Glass-Steagall so that the Citibank could merge with Travelers. And they did, and they became Citigroup. And then Robert Rubin left the government and became a very handsomely paid vice president of, if you can believe it, Citigroup.
Because every single time you try to penalize the power of Wall Street, every single time you try to use government to go after the people that have the power, the exact opposite happens. You have an oligarchic class that is created around Washington, D.C., and the biggest companies get more powerful, and it totally pushes out competition.
You mentioned the financial crisis. The financial crisis
was a product
of the rollback of Glass-Steagall during the Clinton
Incorrect. I'll let you do your case of why you think 2008 happened, and I'll tell you what really happened.
Well,
I do have talking points.
It was not the cause of 2008 of the initial crisis. It was the cause of the severity of the crisis because we allowed commercial banks and investor banks to commingle, and they were too big to fail, and it almost pulled our entire financial system under. And so you return to a day which existed pre-96 where these banks cannot commingle. If one of them fails, it's a problem, but it's not one that is going to throw our entire economy into jeopardy. That is why the debt increased during Obama years, because the economy fell off a cliff. And so if you want to diminish the power of Goldman Sachs and of Citibank and Wells Fargo, and we can agree on this, let's call for a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act. We can do something bipartisan. This will be great. And we can actually diminish the power of these banks.
So I will say you'd actually find more acceptance of that argument in me than most people, because I think there is some merit to the argument that the repeal of Glass-Steagall did open up the reckless behavior of banks. However, I would say in talking about 2008, it was not the primary factor nor the secondary factor of why that financial crisis was created. It was first and foremost Fannie and Freddie, which is a government-sponsored institution.
Did you see that? Like I actually and I knew the reason why I knew what he was going to say is because this was the major talking point that came out of the financial crisis. If you go back, you can see I'm mouthing the words Fannie Mae because this was the talking point, and that's what Charlie has. He has talking points. And you can go, I mean, this gets very weedy. But as you know, the financial crisis was a function of mortgages being issued willy-nilly to people who did not have any financial savvy. In some instances, depending on the region, to people who were taking out 2 or 3 mortgages and flipping houses. Now, none of these people did it to lose money, right? So they didn't really know what they were doing. When you go to a bank, there's a reason why they call them loan officers is because they have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you, the client, are worthy of loaning to. That is their responsibility. That is why their banks get licensed. Many instances that didn't happen. Mortgage industry was set up to, and what would happen is I would make a bad loan to somebody. I would sell that loan, and there became a secondary and a tertiary, and in some instances like a fourth level market for these mortgages to be combined together as these financial instruments and paying off and paying out dividends. These are derivatives. And then there were derivatives on those derivatives, side bets, essentially, that they're going to fail or go up, almost like insurance, hedges. And the problem is that everybody assumed that these mortgages were good because there were 3 private rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and one other. I can't remember what it is. And they issued them all AAA because of the relationship that they had with these investment banks. The investment banks would hire them to rate their own product that they were selling. And of course, if you wanted to get higher again, you rate it well. That was a huge mistake. About 3 or 4 years into this, somewhere in like 2005 or 6, Fannie Mae, which had not engaged in buying these derivative mortgages, got pressure to do so because they were leaving a lot of money on the table. And they were a quasi-governmental agency. Not fully governmental, but quasi. And so there was a lot of pressure for them to make money when everybody's making money hand over fist. They got into it very late. So they were not the cause of this. This was all happening everywhere. It's just at the end, they ended up holding a lot of this stuff. They weren't the only one. Lehman's went under, Bear Stearns. Goldman Sachs had to be completely bailed out. There were others. And so Chase, Citibank. So Fannie Mae was definitely a player, but they were no way the proximate cause. It was just there was a huge real estate bubble. And when it burst, everything fell apart because of the interconnectedness of everything. We can have a bursting real estate bubble, but unless there is like this ongoing interconnectedness, it's not going to threaten the economy like this did.
You raised some interesting points, Sam. However, you think we should pay exorbitant fees. I think that capitalists take risks, and that's a good thing for people in the economy.
Power these banks.
So I will say you'd actually find more acceptance of that argument in me than most people, because I think there is some merit to the argument that the repeal of Glass-Steagall did open up the reckless behavior of banks. However, I would say in talking about 2008, it was not the primary factor nor the secondary factor of why that financial crisis was created. It was first and foremost Fannie and Freddie, which is a government-sponsored institution that has yet to be held accountable, that has never showed their books to the taxpayers, AAA bond rating crap. AAA bond rating mortgages where people had FICO credit scores that were beyond F, that had median income around $35,000 a year, never actually visiting the houses that they were giving the mortgages to. It was B and B minus loans that they were looping together with AAA bond rating, and they were in bed with the rating agencies. So I think Sam and I would agree that there was widespread collusion. Fannie and Freddie is not Wall Street. It is a government institution that Congress sanctioned, has yet to be held accountable.
Fannie and Freddie, you're right. I mean, it's a government. It's a quasi-government function, but it's enough. But Fannie and Freddie entered into that subprime market 4 years after all the major banks did. Believe me,
but Sam,
you were in high school at this time. I can assure
Sam, let me
you.
finish.
I paid attention to this. Now,
can I finish the point?
Well,
Are you going to continue to argue from authority?
The banks gave bad loans. We need more regulation so they uphold their fiduciary.
Okay, so let's. I want to finish the point on the financial crisis. You couple that.
I want to get to trade and tariffs after that.
The Community Reinvestment Act, which incentivized these banks to give loans to low-income communities. The Community Reinvestment Act, you can read the actual language of the bill, had quotas for banks over a certain level to give these loans out. You triple that with Alan Greenspan artificially lowering interest rates after 9/11. So you had cheap money flowing all around, and all of a sudden people said, oh, you can't question the housing market. It's as stable as can be. When you looked at the mortgages that Fannie and Freddie were AAA rating, a government agency, the banks were trading
Fannie and Freddie did not do the ratings.
Sam,
the ratings were by three agencies that were not government agencies.
Sam, Fannie and Freddie, the banks were trading off the confidence that Fannie and Freddie gave them because they said, oh, but Fannie and Freddie is trading it. Oh my goodness, we could trade it. So then Goldman Sachs never actually looked through the mortgages because first and foremost, they were incentivized to do it. They had the cheap money from the government. And finally, they had the confidence and the conviction, which was all false, by a government agency to trade on these loans to destabilize our economy. Now, the bankers that lied, like the Wells Fargo's executives that lied, they should be in prison. You and I agree on that.
If there was a scrawl underneath here, it would be really embarrassing for you, because everyone who knows anything about banking knows that there were 3 rating agencies. Their names were not Fannie Mae and not Freddie Mac.
I never said they were a rating agency. They were trading them as AAA bond rated, and they were set.
Who rated them?
They were rated by the 3 rating agencies.
Right. Are those agencies government agencies?
So what if Fannie and Freddie issued
yes or no?
JP Morgan?
Yes or no?
They are not government agencies.
That's
independent.
Right.
They're independently governed. Hold on. Who is supposed to regulate them? Sam, hold on a second. Who is supposed to regulate them? Did the SEC do their job in regulating them? No.
Part of Dodd-Frank.
I thought the SEC was supposed to keep us safe. It's the biggest government failure of the modern era. The SEC that has a $30 billion budget every single year did not even walk into these rating agencies and say, show me these mortgages, show me the FICO scores, show me how they're 18 months delinquent on
Dodd-Frank. If you're arguing that regulators were not on the ball, you and I agree. There should be stricter regulation.
I'm arguing that's what happens when you continue to add these layers and layers of regulation, and then you blame capitalism for it. You're like, oh, you have all these regulators that used to work at Goldman, they used to work at Credit Suisse, they used to work at Wells Fargo. They go work for Fannie and Freddie. They go work for the regulators. Right. They say, oh, it's just a failure of capitalism despite government being one AAA bond rating.
I understand you. The failure of regulation to regulate the capitalists who gambled with money that was putting our entire economy in jeopardy. The failure of those regulators to do their job, the answer to that is to have no regulation and just let it be completely wireless.
So I know, first of all, Dodd-Frank does the exact opposite of it, number one. Number two, the answer
Dodd-Frank tried to regulate
first of all, you know what the
those
solution
3
is?
agencies.
Sam, I'm so glad you asked. You want to know what the solution is? The solution is we should have let the banks fail and make them pay a price for gambling with our money. That's the solution. Because they won't do it again, Sam. If you bail them out and you give the Wall Street executives huge bonuses, and the Wells Fargo executives should be in prison. You and I agree with that. Yes. They gambled with our money.
Now, this is, it's interesting because, he's very adamant about this. And I certainly would have had no problem with allowing these banks to fail to a certain extent. Certainly, we came in and bailed out these banks. And so what we should have done, there is a middle ground between this. We can let them fail and everybody suffers because there's no cash that you can take out of your ATM machine. Just doesn't work at that point. I had a friend who was working at Citibank at the time, and she had told her husband, take all the cash out you can of the bank. And, within a 24 hours, she was very concerned. There's another way that you could have done this. You could have bailed out these banks and just said, we just bailed you out. Let me tell you what happens in the so-called market when someone bails someone else out. You know what that's called? It's coming in and buying a company. And the U.S. government should have ended up owning every dollar for dollar. In fact, they should have gotten a good deal. Should have been we should have probably done 2 for 1. Every dollar the U.S. government had to pump into these banks should have come back with equity.
That's definitely what Bernie would have done.
I think so, and it's certainly what I think it was Iceland did, and
Sweden.
I don't know if Sweden did it, but I think
Sweden
Iceland
did it back in the day. Iceland did it too. Yeah.
Iceland did it during the financial crisis, and we should have nationalized these banks, nationalized the banks that we needed to make sure that the system didn't fall apart. Let the ones that could die, and move on. And now, if it was up to Charlie, all these banks would have gone under. And I don't know what would have occurred then. We would have had a massive meltdown of our financial system because it was allowed to metastasize without being treated.
It's not literally your money in the ATM, Sam. You don't put it in the machine. Sam, that there's not actually a person inside the ATM dispensing money. Right?
They don't take a $10 bill from your bank vault and put it in the ATM before you take it out.
Now he's about to talk about how the Wells Fargo, and there was a lot of these people. There was a lot of people who really abused the system. People who foreclosed on people on purpose. People who ran up these huge things. There was a company called Countrywide. I want you to Google that. And Countrywide, I think, was bought by Bank of America. And if I'm not mistaken, that bank, Countrywide, had to pay, I think, almost $100 million worth of, it was One West. I'm sorry. It was OneWest, and they had to pay at least $100 million in fines for what they did during this period of time. And its CEO was a guy named... Oh, I know who it was. He was a guy named Steve Mnuchin, who Donald Trump hired to be Treasury Secretary. Continue.
Yes, but you don't have recourse, you don't have punishment, they're going to do it again.
Yes, I agree. If you don't punish them, they'll do it again. Or if you let them have the regulatory space to do it again, they'll do it again.
No, so that's where you and I disagree. It wasn't the regulatory space. It was Fannie and Freddie that paved the way. They were the ones they were the number one distributor of these falsely labeled AAA bonds. They never actually saw the mortgages they were trading. Fannie and Freddie to this day, they've never opened their books.
Okay.
We fund them, and they have never opened their books.
We do not. Listen, the bottom line is the reason why we had such a severe crisis was because of the relationship between the commercial banks and the investment banks. Fannie and Freddie bought those mortgages from those banks 4 years after the run started. I agree with you that you have some of the elements correct. You don't understand the role of Fannie and Freddie in that crisis, but it's largely irrelevant to the point I'm making, which is the crisis was as severe as it was because we rescinded Glass-Steagall under a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. We could go back and we could, today, we could reinstitute it and save the banks. A guy like Steve Mnuchin, I agree with you. He should be in jail. He did this stuff.
I'm not going to talk to Steve personally, but I think where we could agree, where Sam and I agree, is there's something fundamentally wrong, that somehow a prerequisite to run the Treasury Department is working at Goldman Sachs. There's something wrong with that. And that is cronyism.
Well, Steve Mnuchin did not work. Oh, he did work at Goldman Sachs. And then he went to OneWest and basically committed... such a measure of crimes that had Kamala Harris been on top of it in California and listened to her subordinates, Steve Mnuchin might have been indicted. Of course, none of these U.S. attorneys were indicting anybody, and that was also a function of Eric Holder, and that's a whole nother story where he could have gone to, but he didn't because Steve Mnuchin is his daddy's daddy, essentially.
Just about 45 seconds left.
Okay, let's just watch that.
Okay, yeah.
Not capitalism. Now, Sam will say, well, that's what happens when you allow capitalism. I would completely and totally...
Well, when you have corporations gain so much money and power, they're too big, and we need to make them smaller.
I had 4 seconds of an agreement moment, so I want you all to remember.
How does the market make these entities that have too much power smaller?
Competition. Because you know why?
Who's keeping someone from competing with Amazon? Who's keeping...
So I go on at that point to talk about the idea of you can go and attempt to challenge Amazon or challenge Google or challenge one of these banks. But the fact of the matter is because Glass-Steagall, particularly in the context of the bank, because Glass-Steagall was repealed, there were banks that were situated to become behemoths that basically can now close everyone out of the system. So if you're really concerned about the aggregation of power, you need to return to an antitrust regime that predates the Reagan administration, when these companies, whether they were telecommunications or banks or whatnot, were not allowed to buy up other ones and become so huge. And the one thing I will say, and then this video will combine with the rest of this debate, is that if I take Charlie as being sincere on some of these things, that he does have a problem with the consolidation of power, and if I take him seriously on these things, that he's sincere about him, I think that, as he learns more about this stuff, if he really does try to, that, like I say, this guy may end up not doing exactly what he's doing today. But maybe that's being a little bit too hopeful. All right, so
you stay away from my Charlie.
If you're watching on YouTube, we're going to just roll into the beginning of the debate. And folks, sadly, I'm out of time. It is 2:36. We didn't do time. I didn't do time management in the way I wanted to. And we've got 15 people holding on line. Let me just take one quick phone call. You're calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Oh, I lost him. All right, folks, I apologize. We'll be back. Mike will be here tomorrow, and then, of course, we'll be here on Friday. Until then, see you later.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and out of gear.